You can create AI Slop and you can be in the warm embrace of the worst bits of your Facebook feed endlessly.
Welcome to Crashed, the podcast that covers technology properly. Its intersection with politics, business, philosophy, ethics, and everything else. We'll be covering the who, the how, the what, and why it actually matters. Today that means AI, the hype, the slop, the bubble, the collapse, and the reality of numbers behind some of those claims. I'm Alex Hudson.
And I'm Chris Stokel-Walker.
And you have been cheating on me with The Guardian.
I have. I'm very sorry. Today I appeared on the Today in Focus podcast talking about AI Slop. I've done a lot of things. I hate to break it to you, Alex, there are more.
You are on more than just this podcast.
Well, not this podcast, but other news channels and things like that. My Monday was incredibly busy because, in case you didn't realize, the internet fell over. So my day went out the window.
In a good, exciting, all over the airwaves sort of way?
Yeah, in a way where initially, if you're early in your career, you start having heart palpitations and you get really worried about it. But then actually midway through your career, you go, you know what, this is exactly why I got into this, because I love that weird adrenaline coursing through my veins. I have a very funny story for you, Alex, actually, which is that multiple broadcasters and also a couple of podcasts or podcast adjacent things that I appeared on Monday struggled to get me on because the systems that they use, which includes Zoom and includes, by the way, Riverside, were affected by the AWS outage. So there was this kind of weird situation where they were like, we want you on, but we can't figure out quite how to get you on.
Riverside is the podcasting platform that we are currently using for anyone who isn't so knee-deep in podcasting that they are not up to date in terms.
You mean there are people who aren't knee-deep in podcasting?
Not yet, we're only on episode 2, maybe. So today we're going to talk about AI and one person who essentially went viral for talking about AI slop and just about that actually AI slop might be eating AI slop and then the world might be ending just because the AI will end up eating itself is Shae Omonijo. And she's agreed to come on the podcast. If you've been on the internet at all in the last week, you will have heard, well, the last month maybe, the AI bubble. So Fortune's business editor says that 75% of gains, 80% of profits, 90% of capex are all down to AI's grip on the S&P. And everyone is very concerned about it. Nick Clegg, who has a book out, we've mentioned that now in both episodes, has said that there is certainly a correction in terms of valuations. And these valuations do, for all the reasons that people have commented on endlessly, do seem pretty crackers, Nick Clegg's words. So, Chris, are we actually in this bubble, or is it that reality is just coming into contact with all of the hype that we've become used to?
Oh, that's a question that doesn't allow me to make an I agree with Nick joke, but okay, Alex, that's fine. That's a one for the deep cuts of politicians and political fans. Look, it's a bit of both, right? So there is undoubtedly hype. If you have, let's set aside the fact that Nick Clegg is Nick Clegg, and so he's often wrong about things. Okay. Let's set that aside.
We have not asked Nick Clegg for right to reply, but we'll drop an email after the show.
No, well, I mean, student loans and things like that. So I'm of that generation anyway. So by the by, besides the fact that let me put it this way, Nick Clegg is a really interesting character because he has a very close proximity to the tech industry while also admitting in his own book that he came to the tech industry quite naively and has, I think, learned from that, but I think I don't think if you ask Nick Clegg to define himself, I don't think he would class himself as a tech executive first, let me put it that way, or a former tech executive first. And so you always, I think, have to bear in mind when he's saying these sorts of things that he's one step removed from it and so isn't necessarily at the coalface of what's going on here. But I do think that he is right in terms of this, and I think that it is interesting because we have other people who are even closer to this place who you believe would be hyping this up, actually saying they also agree that there is a bubble going on, not least a certain Mr. Sam Altman, who has talked about how he believes that there is more money sloshing around this than can possibly actually end up getting valuable returns from. So yeah, it's a bit of both, Alex, to be honest. I'm copping out. I'm giving a politician's answer, which is funny given that we're talking about Nick Clegg. But anyway, it's a bit of both worlds in that it is, yes, there is a bubble. That bubble we are realizing exists because the hype is coming crashing into the reality here. And if you look at some of the stuff, it just isn't necessarily sustainable. So, I mean, I'm writing a story today on GPUs. So obviously GPUs are a really important part of the AI bubble. They are in scarce supply. They are seen as massively important. NVIDIA has built a $4 trillion company off the back of them. And yet AI companies and tech companies generally have a misunderstanding of how long they will last. So they are putting into their balance sheets that these things will depreciate within 5 or 6 years generally. On the other hand, you have Jensen Huang from NVIDIA saying that we are going to release a new chip every year, which encourages you into an annual cycle of renewal. And frankly, demand is so high, and the computing inference and kind of training demands on these chips are so great that they are burning out at faster rates than 6 years. So undoubtedly, we're in, if not a bubble, we're certainly in some sort of misalignment. And some of that is the hype making people more excited. Some of that is just that we're figuring this stuff out. We are, to use the horrible phrase and metaphor, building the plane as it is being flown. So like, we don't really know what the limitations are of our investments and our returns on those investments, because this hasn't necessarily been done before. And that isn't necessarily the hype. That's just reality.
I don't think that's both sidesism. I think actually that's a clear view of, you are saying that it's not necessarily a bubble as bubble would have it, but it is a false inflation in that something has to give. So Jared Bernstein, who's the chair of President Biden's Council of Economic Advisors, and Ryan Cumming wrote a co-op-ed. Ryan Cumming served the council as an economist. They put it in really clear terms. We believe it's time to call the third bubble of our century the AI bubble. While no one can be certain, we believe this is more likely the case than not. Investment in AI has been so huge, with venture capitalists investing nearly $200 billion in the sector this year alone. And they're implying that it's going to burst. And my view on it is that in the core structures, so within NVIDIA, within Apple, within OpenAI, within the big traditionally strong companies, I think there will be a readjustment. But it is all of these startups and all of these companies that are, oh, I'm a new AI company. Oh, you're just an HR company. Oh, I'm a new AI company. Oh, you're just a housing company. Oh, we're a new AI company. Oh, are you just a consultancy company with new computers? And while the impact on the S&P and the global shockwaves that come, if there is that really shock readjustment, the long-term slowdown will come from it becoming a commodity and it really getting to the bottom of what does AI mean, what is it useful for, and what is its market value, instead of being a thing that if you say it in your one-page pitch to venture capitalists, you somehow get 100,000 more in funding, or $1 million more in funding, or $10 million more in funding. And that is the reckoning that we're about to come to.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's an interesting one. I mean, how many emails do you get where just AI is scattergun sent across a subject line or the actual contents of it every single day?
The number, including AI, have now increased above the number of people who email me saying, embargo, do not release, without me ever having heard from them before. So in a way, that's the good barometer. If it is more than the embargo number, if it is less, then it's still manageable.
So we have a lot to teach the world about both AI bubbles and not claiming things that you can't do, and also the basic principles of journalism and how both parties need to agree to something.
I have thought about running a ghost Twitter account just to run through all the embargo. But I thought that, firstly, that's a lot of time. Secondly, also, you become that person, and that becomes your entire MO. But yeah, I think the bubble is real, but I don't know what will come crashing down. I think it might be data centers. I think the innovations within AI, they're kind of flattening out. And I was giving a lecture about this, and then if quantum runs alongside it, and if quantum becomes implementable at the same time as AI is growing, then fine, we could get that exponential growth in AI. if quantum is still slow to become meaningfully useful, except again in press releases, the number of quantum press releases going up day by day again, then you can see whether it's how you use the existing technology that becomes more important rather than coming up with new technology. And that poses different questions to the market. And I don't know what their answer might be.
Yeah. So one worry is that this is a lot of money at stake. I mean, if you look at what the government is saying, they want to back this to their hilt. There is investment being redirected towards this in a way that perhaps might not play out well in the long run. It's a shame that we're the guinea pigs, right?
Then we get into the third bailout or third severe bailout in 20 years, in 15 years, since 2008 was the first big bailout. What was the date? What was the academic data done around the generational stuff that is no longer happening generationally and now happens once a decade, and they're predicting it will now happen once every 5 years or something crazy like that?
Things is disruptive is the key word, right? This is disruptive. It's both definitions of it.
Fail fast, break things. Haven't we? I thought we'd stop that now. I thought that had vanished as a business principle.
Please stop breaking things. Just for once, just for a little bit. Just don't break things constantly. Just let us have a year where we don't break things. Speaking of which, should we talk about AI competitors to TikTok?
Wow, it's like you have a running order or something. Great segue. Yeah. OpenAI has launched a browser.
Yeah. Everything is AI nowadays, which is interesting. And it's interesting because it kind of is like competing with the rise of AI Slop. So now, rather than just having to consume it, you can also just simultaneously create and consume it using Atlas, which is the worst kept secret in the AI world. We knew that OpenAI was going to try and do a browser because they are nobbling away at their competitors, and Google, of course, has the dominant space in the browser market, has for, best part of 15 years now, I suppose, and is really dominating this space. I cannot use it because I am not a Mac fanboy. I am on Windows. Are you on Apple?
Of course. I mean, look at our haircuts. You were obviously a Windows user. I'm obviously a Mac user.
This is like that old-fashioned advert, right? We had was it Mitchell
no one
Webb
wants to be Mitchell or Webb. No one wants to be either of those people.
I think I'm probably in the two of this. I'm certainly probably more the David Mitchell. Let's be honest. I'm willing to take
neither
that
of those are good.
No, Hobson's choice.
I think it's a cop out. I think it is. It's built on Chromium. Is that how you pronounce that word? Chromium, which is just a sort of the open access version of the base code of Chrome. And it's just replaced, at least in its first iteration, it is just testing what you put in your search bar. It uses OpenAI instead of Google. And while that is a huge part of the infrastructure of how you use the web, it doesn't feel like a revolution. It feels more like a capitalist market share push. It doesn't feel like you're changing technology. It feels like you're tweaking the way how you use a browser. But for most users, except for the button that you push, it won't make that much difference, particularly given Google's push on AI search, at least in its first instance.
Yeah. And I think it won't be successful.
Really?
Yeah. Well, because, so if you think about this, the ChatGPT was a revolutionary new product. It kind of changed a paradigm and established, frankly, a new one. Like we had had chatbots before, and we had kind of messaging apps before, and I suppose you can say that this is a version of each of those smushed together into one thing, but it was really unseen before, and so that gave people the license to use it and to try it out. That idea of the novelty factor. And I think that was important as part of OpenAI's success with ChatGPT and, frankly, any generative AI chatbot that has followed. However, I don't think that people wake up in the morning and go, ooh, I'm really excited about a new browser, in the same way that they go, ooh, I'm really excited about a new paradigm of communication. And what is interesting, if you look
I woke
back,
up only yesterday saying I'm really excited about the new paradigm of conversation. Those are the exact words I was thinking about.
Well, yeah, not in as many words, right, Alex? I'm putting on my posh voice and using my long words because it is important.
That's what happens when you go on BBC Scotland.
It's also how I'm David Mitchell, right? I am definitely the Mitchell of the two here. But what I'm saying is, I think for a small minority of people, and I include myself in this, because when I was a teenager, I tried out Opera, I tried out Chrome, I tried out Firefox. For many years, I used Firefox. And then, frankly, I grew up and realized that actually they're much of a muchness, and so I didn't really care. And now I just use Chrome, because you would never use Edge. You use something else entirely, right?
Because you hate having memory of your computer. I use Edge. It's the lightest browser that you don't have to think about, and it's built on Chromium. It is not the best browser, but it's a simple. I use a combo of Edge and Firefox depending on what I'm doing.
Yeah, you see, Edge to me still has that IE stank on it somehow. In my mind, I still have memories of like really death days of Internet Explorer when they were just outmoded, outpaced, nobody liked them. But I think that us having this conversation is an indication that we are both really deeply involved in the tech world. And I think our listeners will be deeply involved in the tech world and will care about this. I think the average person does not care how they get from point A to point B on the internet, provided that it gets them there. And so the friction involved in getting a new browser, I think, will mean that this doesn't happen.
But from what I was reading, it said that because it's built on Chromium, you can just instantly port over. So the friction is less.
Friction is less.
The new buzzword. The new buzzword of 2025 of friction. Friction less, more friction.
But the friction is less. But would you even bother in the first place, right? Like, does the average person know which browser they are using day in, day out?
I hope so. You imagine, but then the amount of people still using Safari and not thinking about it and still using the defaults and all of that. Maybe you're right.
Which is where I come in, right? Because I think if you look back at the history over the last 15 years, at least when it comes to Windows, and again, I speak as only a Windows person, I am not your Mac fanboy. I am neither Mitchell nor Webb, I have decided now. You have two big browsers that have dominated the space. We had in the early to late 2000s, we had Internet Explorer because, frankly, there were no other good options, or it was just too difficult to bother to get it if you weren't a really kind of keen bean in terms of getting on the cutting edge of stuff. And then we had that shift in terms of moving towards Chrome as the sort of default. And it's, if you look back at I think it's StatCounter has, this is one of my favorite kind of charts. They have like a web browser share that goes back over 15 odd years or whatever. And Chrome is now sat pretty at the top and has been, frankly, for like absolutely yonks. I think it was something like the sort of late 2000s, around about 2010 or so, when we saw that crossover. 2012 it was, when Internet Explorer started to get replaced as the leading browser on Windows PCs, at least by Chrome. And the reason behind that, I think in part, was because people realized that they had an option at that point. Up until then, they hadn't. Then there was the idea that you had to have a choice window mandated by regulatory antitrust decisions that said, you know what, IE is too dominant in this space. So people went, oh, okay, maybe I will try something out. And then they used Chromes. Obviously, also Chromebooks and things like that came into the fall. But I don't think you're going to have that same sort of thing. I just don't think people are going to pick this option because, frankly, we've had AI browsers before, right? Perplexity has one. Loads of other companies have them. They aren't setting the world on fire. And I don't think that OpenAI being behind it is going to change things.
So according to StatCounter, the global stats counter, Chrome sits at around 72%, Safari 14%, Edge 4.7%, Firefox 2%, Samsung Internet 1.9%, Opera 1.75%, which... That hurts my mind. How are so few people using Firefox? How are so few people using Edge?
See, I told you, people don't care. They just don't care. As long as it's easy, right? So
Chrome doesn't work. It does. It just melts your memory.
But I agree, as my fan is going crazy right now with Chrome running. But I think, Alex, you are the kind of BMW or Jag driver equivalent of the tech world, in that you are caring about the tech equivalent of cars enormously. You are like, you're going in under the hood, you're looking at the windscreen wipers, you go, can get a more ergonomic blade here, that will help in terms of
overestimating BMW drivers.
Well, yeah, whatever. I don't know my cars either. I literally have a little course that gets me from point A to point B, and I think more people in the world are like that. And I think it's the same thing with web browsers. They know that they need a web browser, just like they know that a car has to have 4 wheels, unless you're driving a Morris Minor, and nobody does that anymore. They know that it needs to have an engine, they know it needs to have a wheel, and hopefully 2 pedals at work, at least. And they want to get from one place to the other. They don't really care about the browser that they use, provided that it works, which is why this will not work. Atlas will fail.
Well, it's like going back to that Mitchell and Webb thing. Someone memed up the Apple v Mac v PC thing, and they just said, I'm a Mac, I'm a PC. And it doesn't really matter at all, because we're all using browsers and exactly the same, whichever platform you're using, which is sad. How did we get onto this? we were talking about the AI browser. I think, given the amount of money behind it, and given if it hits network effect, and if the right people start using it, and if there is demonstrable improvements, you can see how the goodwill, might be the wrong word, the impetus and the growth. Like, if you look at even the app having 1 million downloads in the first 5 days of its launch, which is a whole different conversation that we're going to come on to, ChatGPT still has that incredible way to get things moving.
Yeah, Sora benefited from that, I agree. I just think Sora had a USP, which is AI Slop. And you can create AI Slop, and you can be in the warm embrace of the worst bits of your Facebook feed endlessly. I don't think that marketing sell is there when it comes to Titan. But I'm very happy to be proved wrong. I mean, I say that publicly. I'm really not. I'll be furious quietly, but that's by the by.
Right, we have gone wildly off topic, which is a beautiful thing. We will be back in a minute. Welcome to Shae Omonijo, a PhD candidate in history at Harvard and an AI business founder who says she's helping keep people human in the AI-driven world. And she's been busy going viral all over the social networks with her sort of theory around AI slop. And you've sort of said that the internet is dead and around 50% of new writing is now AI generated, and that if humans stop producing, then AI is just eating its own slop. And now over 1 million people have watched it all over social medias. And you put a call out saying, can please some media come and ask me about my thesis? So here we are. Tell us about your thesis.
Yes. So, as you said, I'm a PhD candidate in the humanities. And when you hear all the news about AI, how it's going to upend our lives, it's going to change everything about us, I was really interested in the actual data. So, of course, there was a huge news story that broke about authors and knowledge workers who had their books trained on by AI. So then I started to snoop around about understanding the actual data that was used in order to make ChatGPT and like other large language models possible. So at the end of the day, the vast amount of data that was extracted from the internet is in many ways great enough to produce what we have right now. But if you're trying to create something beyond a general purpose LLM model, you're going to need high quality data. So high quality in, high quality out. So I think I was literally sitting in the library when I realized where I spend majority of my time is in expertly written and curated materials. It's archives, it's libraries, it's private collections, and the vast amount of human genius hasn't yet been digitized. Like, look at how old the internet is. So if you want to create something that is on par with some of the smartest humans that exist, you're going to need those smart humans' data. So my thesis basically just says the next frontier of data acquisition is actually going to be in domain expertise knowledge. And most of that is not really digitized yet, or it's beyond, paywalls and things of that sort and are really hard to access. So you can't just like scrape it. Like you need licensing deals and permission to access those things.
And do you think then, Shae, that those licensing deals will solve that problem? I mean, obviously, you've talked about the issue of a lack of data and we're running out of training data. I reported on those same sort of forecasts. But is that not going to be extended out a little bit longer if we do have these deals, which we are seeing? Unfortunately, I think that's a bad idea, but we're seeing newspapers and things like that lining up to sign up to this sort of stuff.
Yeah, so the question is going to become, will people still be generating content using their own intellect and creative thinking skills? So, for example, if people are submitting materials to their publishers that is written using AI, which means using the same grammar, using the same sentence structure, using the same general ideas, then that's still poisoning the well, essentially. You're not contributing the vast, diversity of intelligence to these models. I think the B2B models that we're seeing right now, which is contracts between, for example, academic publishers, even newspapers, as you mentioned, and AI companies are not really trickling down to the authors or the people that are producing those contents. Like I just made a video about someone who wanted to submit an academic paper, which as an academic, I completely understand how much work goes into writing and researching those papers, but had to consent to having his work trained on by AI. I'm pretty sure he's not benefiting from the $44 million deal that Wiley made with these AI companies. So we really have to start thinking about like how can individuals who want to opt in to having their work used, how can they benefit from it? And I think people like Matthew Price at Cloudflare is doing a really great job with this to make sure that if you are even scraping more content, how can we create a middleman to charge for that?
Yeah, and I guess that's really interesting. I wrote about the idea of AI poisoning for new scientists, and I thought that it was a really interesting idea. The idea that we're kind of deliberately either trapping AI crawlers into sort of a maze, or we're poisoning stuff. There's been some, I think it was, I can't remember exactly what the name of the model is, but basically poisoning AI image generators by having imperceptible things that mean they produce garbage, they produce cats out of dogs or whatever. Is there kind of a risk? Do you worry about the flip side of that, though, Shae, in terms of like, unfortunately, we are in this world where AI companies are doing this, much as we might feel difficult about it, but actually there is a problem here in that they are going to pollute stuff.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about AI, it's important to talk about more than just AI companies that are based in the US. So I don't want to perpetuate this like AI humanities antagonism, because there are great companies that are doing things to actually make my job, for example, as a historian, much easier. So there is a company based in Europe actually called Transcribus, which is building an LLM model based on historical writing. So that's easier for me to actually read materials and handwriting from the 19th century without like squinting my eyes or spending, 5 years working at a library in order to read them, right? So I think when people are thinking about the large amounts of undigitized data as training these models become cheaper and more affordable, I think more people will actually start looking at creating their own LLMs and their own bots to train on specific domain problems that we have. So I'm optimistic in the sense that there's a possibility where more and more people beyond just the big name AI companies, once again, I don't want to, pile on them too much, but to say that there is a real possibility where we could actually start solving real problems and not focus on like, TikTok, like duplicates.
I'm going to be more optimistic. So there's an Axios report that takes on this big report that actually shows that the 50-50 balance, and the data is so clumsy and no one quite, everyone's sort of saying it could be this, but it's not this, but it might be this, but there isn't good data in the AI tracking and we can't track all of the internet really understands it. But the 50-50 mix was hit about 18 months ago, give or take. And since then, it's kind of evened out. And so actually, humans might be augmenting using AI, but actually it seems to have hit its peak. And it seems like the internet will be 50-50 human, and humans are creating more content than ever. So does that give you hope?
It does give me hope. And I think a question that, once again, I feel like a humanist, someone who's in the humanities and a non-technical person, should be on every single AI panel, conversation, conference, because we have so much to contribute when it comes to talking about this. But I think the question is, we have to create a universal standard for what AI generated actually means. So if you brainstorm, but the final product is all you, is that AI generated? If you, already created the idea yourself, you just needed help with like structuring and phrasing it in a certain way, is that considered AI generated? Like, you know what I mean? So I think once we create a universal standard of what is considered AI generated, writing and content, then we'll be able to legislate, we'll be able to, create new standards and new guardrails. So I think it's really important that we come together as an international community, because this is something that crosses multiple borders, to talk about like, okay, what are we defining as the standard of not just AI generated content, but what's the standard of human generated content? Because we usually just, leave it to the prizes and the, the big, humanities organizations in order to determine what that is. But I think we can do that as a community. So
no one's quite sure when the current data, your point, I think you sort of suggested that it might run out in 2026. And looking through all of the data is like, you can pick one expert that says 1 year and one expert that says another year and the other expert that says it doesn't matter. And this expert that says it does matter. And actually all of these learning models can now differentiate better between what is good data and what is bad data. And given the absolute fog that there is around this, is there any real potential for someone particularly across the international community? Is there any capability of getting a real handle on what that legislation might look like and what could be done on a global scale?
In terms of data acquisition?
In terms of data acquisition and in terms of figuring out what slop should be regulated and what slop shouldn't be regulated.
Oh, yes. Okay. So
easy questions.
Yeah, I know this is a very big question. You're right. People will have different opinions on it. But I think at the end of the day, I believe there's a way that we can create a disciplinary standard. So for those who are in literature, the humanities, like, I refer to the prizes because in many ways, what's seen as the pinnacle of great human writing has been determined, for better or worse, by certain international bodies, right? So it's, it would be great for them to say like, okay, this is what we consider to be the standard of human generated content and writing and like things of that sort, so that we can start thinking about
this. But also
throughout
history, that has been rammed full of prejudice. It's been sort of white privilege, it's been posh privilege, it's been male privilege, all of those things. So actually, in a way, in a post-gatekeeper world, or as those gatekeepers shrink in influence, could that be an actual force for good rather than a force for maintaining those sort of bottlenecks?
Yeah, and I think it's actually an opportunity to democratize who we consider to be the gatekeepers, because there's more and more people, and I'm not saying it's perfect by no means, but there's more and more people that are having access to judging human writing and materials. And there's new prizes that I genuinely believe will start to arise because people are starting to be very careful about the kind of content that they're putting out. But even within the art world, for example, I was at Frieze here in London last week, and when you look at the kind of art that's being produced, it's no longer like surrealist art, it's no longer like abstract art, because no one wants to be accused of creating AI generated art. So that means the standard for art is changing, and the standard for what people are willing to pay for in terms of art acquisition is changing, right? So this is happening across multiple disciplines. But I think when we're talking about, how international communities can come together to, discuss new standards, I think as many people as possible should be part of that conversation, even within, domains that we think are not being affected by AI.
I'm going to put on my pessimist hat here, Shae. Sorry. I mean,
Please
Alex
do.
and I are both massive pessimists, and I'm kind of intrigued here because I agree with you 100% that we need to have like people power, and that actually we need to be aware of this and fight back. And one of the things that I always say when I'm talking about AI is the more that we have AI layered into our lives, the more that we actually recognize and acknowledge what it is to be human and like these human connections and these sorts of conversations that we're having. But I'm also really like downbeat about the fact that the power imbalance is such that big tech are making the running here and they are dictating what happens. So for instance, even if we look at like, there's a publication out there called Colossus, which is basically big tech bros have decided that they want to be covered in a way that they find nice. And so they have this really sycophantic type of reporting and coverage of them. Do you not worry that while we have that happening and we have a kind of like renaissance in individualism and art, that it's just us getting smaller and smaller slices of the pie? I guess I'm looking for some savior and some salvation here, Shae. Can you give me a reason to be happy to exist?
Well, the very fact that you're a human being should, make you happy to exist because you have inherent dignity and value. And so I just want to say that for certain. But yes, no, don't get me wrong. I am worried about the swift consolidation of power around AI. I think if just a few companies can dictate how businesses are going to run, how governments are operated, and how international organizations collaborate, that is a huge source of concern. And at the same time, I'm very hopeful that with the development of this technology, that more and more governments and communities and people are thinking about sovereign infrastructure, are thinking about making sure their data is hosted within their own community so that, for example, AWS going down doesn't mean that a children's hospital stops working, classrooms can't function, things of that sort. So there's more and more opportunity, even just in terms of the educational pipeline, people having access to more resources and knowledge to be able to learn and build things within their own value system and what's important to them, I think actually adds a little bit more optimism. And the last thing I will say is, ever since, quote unquote, the anxious generation has been developing, we're actually seeing a huge turn to what I call the nostalgia economy. More and more people want to experience life without tech. One thing that I do quite a lot, and I can do that, is that I oftentimes just let my phone die because I pretty much know London. I can, roam around. If I get lost, I ask someone and I have a full conversation with them and I learn something about them. So we're seeing more and more people returning to this. So even though there is reason for a lot of pessimism, so that's why I want to hold space for that, because, I have my days where sometimes I'm on threads. I'm like, everything is crap. Oh my gosh, everyone's so evil. But then I also want to turn to the fact that, like, look at this renaissance of culture that's happening. If you look at the Harlem Renaissance, it happened between the Great War and the Great Depression. That was a very tough time for people. And yet look at all of the artistic expression that happened during that time. So
I think you have to run. So I think final question is, where can we find you? Is there anything you want to shout out, or is there anything you want to sort of say, look at this that I'm doing at the moment?
Well, everyone can watch Critical Thinking in the Age of AI on YouTube. I've had so much fun producing that series. I'm trying to get more videos out, and you can follow me on social media at I am Shae O. Shae with an AE, because I know there's a lot of Y's out there.
But yeah, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully may you ride the crest of your millions and millions of views onto whatever comes next.
Yes, thank you so much. It was so great speaking with you all.
Thanks, Shae.
Bye.
Alex, what did you make of that conversation? Did you come out of it feeling a little bit more enlightened, a little bit happier, a little bit more content with the future of the world, given what Shae said?
I like that mood can be influenced by one individual conversation. That's beautiful. I think it made me confident about the nuances and the difficulties and the intelligent people are thinking about these things. I think that TikTok that sent her viral was this very clear one polarized viewpoint. And actually you sit down and speak to her for 20 minutes and it's this really interesting nuanced view around actually it's complicated. And as we both as tech journalists go, everything is complicated, everything is nuanced, nothing is yes, nothing is no. Actually, will AI run out of data? Probably not. Are all of the sort of tech bros trying to make PR lines out of everything to do with this? Like my list of notes for that conversation was like 4 pages long, just of the different academics saying different things 6 months apart because it's moving so quickly. And actually having someone emerging in that AI space who thinks is really interesting. So yes, not more optimistic, but more hopeful about the capacity to have nuanced and difficult and critical and collaborative and collegiate conversations is great. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I agree with you that TikToks are not the best form of communication for this sort of stuff, because when I watched the TikTok, as I said to you, I got upset about the oversimplification of it. I actually said, well, I covered this in 2023 and it turned out that that wasn't the case, but we've now learned that obviously things have changed a little bit. Actually, that kind of touches on like a broader irk that I have generally with this sort of stuff, which is the way in which algorithmic presentation on places like TikTok encourages us to rely on maybe kind of slightly factually bending or oversimplistic narratives. And so that is why it is important, say the two guys running a podcast, that we have these longer form conversations.
Your algorithm is different to mine. My TikTok particularly is just long form, odd, nerdy stuff, giving full stories and or people playing mini golf at great length. So I think it knows me too well. I think TikTok is an opportunity to have these conversations, and it is the chance for, us as podcasters. Once we start rolling this out more heavily, we're going to be so heavily on TikTok, and we are going to be influenced by the clips that we make as to what does well on TikTok, and that is the reality of where we're at. So as the AI bubble becomes more AI, as the editing becomes more automated, as we can feed in what we know about the algorithm of TikTok into a machine that then can edit it for us, which already kind of is half of the way there, then we're part of the problem. We will be back for part 3 when we shift tack away from AI for a brief moment. Welcome back. And last week we talked about Daniel Grover and the hack. And since then, all things bad have happened to Amazon, and the repercussions of what Jaguar Land Rover's hack has really cost them have become clear. But Chris, you've been appearing, as you talked about earlier, all over the airwaves to talk about these things. So you're the expert here.
Yeah. Oh, well, no, I mean, experts, as journalists, I'm the journalist here, the communicator rather than the expert. I simply communicate the expert's point of view to people in a way that is hopefully snappy. Yeah, two twinned stories, I suppose, that highlight the precarity of our digital infrastructure came about for different reasons. One is cock up, one is conspiracy, in a sense. The Amazon outage, the AWS outage, obviously, unless you were, I don't know, on a plane or something like that, or I didn't want to say living under a rock because that's just a boring, trite thing to say, and people no longer live under rocks these days. Even people who live under rocks also probably have smartphones, and so they have access to the internet, right?
When were people living under rocks?
A long time ago. We had it's like, can't think of a joke that would be funny there. We had something. I was trying to think of like some AI pun before intelligence. We had AI. Yeah, doesn't matter. Let's move on. But this AWS outage was kind of all encompassing. Everybody was touched by it in some way. Whether it was you couldn't wake up in the morning because your Amazon Echo didn't work, which is like the most dystopian thing in the world, or if you were in the US and you couldn't sleep at night because your 8 sleep mattress, which was connected to the web, was also on AWS, and therefore you couldn't get cool air blowing through your mattress.
Don't do the CES Internet of Things microwave thing. None of it is real. No matter what Berners-Lee is on about, the Internet of Things has never happened, will never happen. It is this... unless you're one of the 3 people who have one of those mattresses.
Well, a lot of them do. They are overrepresented in the tech bro world, and this is the tech bro reckoning, where they've realized that actually the Jetsons-like technology feature that they thought they had is just a pool pump and some AWS connections that can sometimes go down.
The tech bros reckoning is one poor night's of sleep because of 3 hours of downtime because of a very particular bit of error.
Yeah, it will ruin their Whoop score. And if you know what that is, then don't listen to our podcast.
But we sort of talked about this, and my perspective on the story is Amazon went out for a couple of hours. That makes sense. Like that's the sort of beginning end of the story. It's like when you write a obituary story, and the break news, if that happens, it has the shortest dwell time of any article you will ever write because people click on the article, see that the person has died, see how they died, see you survive them and then click out. So it's always the lowest dwell time of any article. With this, it's AWS is down. Is any site that I use still going to hit me in the day? Oh, I'm done. And the analysis of it, AWS's uptime is so unbelievably 99% plus that it's just a freak thing. But you were talking about this, the actual impact of it is something that is worth discussing and getting to the bottom of.
That is the story. The fact that AWS's uptime is so stupendously brilliant, by the way, also Google and Microsoft, other cloud platforms are available to you. The fact that their uptime is so significant is in many ways the problem here. We have built a too efficient system. That means that we've put all of our eggs not necessarily into one basket, but into generally 3 baskets run by 3 very large companies that happen to control something like 70% of the market. And so what happens is if any one of those goes down, you start to see these effects rippling out across the entirety of society. Now, look, outages do happen, right? And this is the thing. They always talk about kind of 6 nines reliability, so 99.99999% uptime. That 0.00001%, by the way, I am counting on my hands because I'm not that intelligent to be able to do it off the top of my head. It's just off camera. So for those of you that are watching any social media video version of this, the fact that that 0.0001% downtime is so significant is a consequence of us not thinking about what happens here. There have always been outages. So, AWS had an outage in 2023. They had an outage in 2021. They had an outage in 2020. It just happened. What I think has changed, and what I think is interesting about this one as a sort of breakwater point, is that we have had more and more of our lives in each successive outage affected because more and more of our lives are linked in some way to digital elements. So the fact that we have CES-style Internet of Things, fridges and freezers and, mattresses and alarm clocks in our lives means that when these things go wrong, you start to recognize them. I think it's kind of like that fear cycle that we saw maybe a couple of years ago when we were worried about power outages and all that sort of stuff. The fear of this happening, it feels very Threads-like. It feels sort of post-apocalyptic. It's like you're in a Cormac McCarthy novel or something like that, wandering down a road, unable to get a good night's sleep with your 8-sleep mattress and unable to wake up because your Amazon Echo is not working. This dystopian future where horror, you have to go back and start to speak to people once again. That's the future that we're in.
But the dystopian future only lasted, I think Amazon said, within 3 hours was what was...
It was, and it was fixed. But you forget, Alex, our attention spans are short. TikTok is always to blame here. So 3 hours in 2025 time is like 3 months in 1985 time. This is the big problem.
That is not, the attention spans are not lower. There is just less willingness to cope with bad stuff because there is more choice. You are choosing better things. The attention span, more books are being read than ever before, more albums are being listened to than ever before, more gigs are being attended, more theatre performances are being attended than ever before. It is just that the mediocrity that we used to fill our Saturday nights with in front of the TV at my great aunt's house would no longer fly because you have 17 options rather than 3, or a million options rather than 3. I will die on this hill.
What is the name of your production company, Alex?
Everything popular is wrong. Fine, but the bar has to be so much higher now that you go back and watch some of these shows and actually, okay, why am I watching this? And the thumb stopping moment, I think, in part to what we were talking about earlier. Your thing about a little bit when you're on TikTok, it has to be a little bit polarizing or a little bit giddy and you have to shout things really loudly is a bit of the problem because people have become impatient. That doesn't mean that once they're invested in something, their attention span is so much. Once you get invested, you get so much more invested. But as the internet fragments further, it becomes more complicated to try and measure that, work it out, and actually what that means in practice.
What did you used to watch at your grandmother's house that you hated so much?
Didn't hate it. It was beautiful. But have you watched the rejigging of Gladiators?
Yes, Gladiators wasn't bad. If you're going to besmirch the good name of Gladiators, then I'm going to get very angry.
Not besmirching Gladiators, but it's a 10-minute show dragged out into 90 minutes. So that's where the problem comes. And I do not want to listen to what Bradley Walsh thinks about anything.
Yeah, it's Gladiator. The remake of Gladiators is not very good. I still do have a Pavlovian reaction when I hear the theme tune to the Last of the Summer Wines TV show, because that reminds me of having to go to school on a Monday morning on a Sunday night, and genuinely made me very, very sad every time that would come on.
Love that program. Loved that program so much. Reminds me of my dad so much. Right, now we are no longer talking about tech. I think if you could pick the opposite thing of technology, Last of the Summer Wine would be definitely top 1% of things not about technology. So, last week in our first episode, we didn't do any exit intro about actually, if you want to we said, get in touch with us, ask us about things, and we didn't actually leave any email addresses or ways to get in contact with us, or any messaging numbers or anything like that. So if you want to get in contact with us, at AlexHuds, AlexHuds, or on any of the social networks.
I am an annoying one because I have different usernames on different ones, but go for X, because that is still where I mostly inhabit. I am at Stokel, which is Stokel.
And get in touch. We would love to hear from you. We would love to hear about things that we should cover, things that we shouldn't cover. If we've talked about Last of the Summer Wine too much, which I think is any of it, even if it is a beloved show, or if you're a Bradley Walsh truther also, we can only apologise. We have not asked Bradley Walsh to come back on his comments. But it was really interesting on AI. It was really interesting on all things to do with Land Rover. And we will speak to you again next week.